Hello, today we're going to be talking a little bit more about research proposals, and we're going to focus on how to write objectives and hypotheses that are part of the introduction of your research proposal. So if you remember, when we were working on our introductions, we were trying to funnel our information. We were starting with background information, using the literature to make a case for our study. Then we were narrowing it down to what the unknown was in the field, or what the problem we were addressing, or the need we were trying to fill. And then we funnel it down to what are our general objectives of our project. And these are going to set the stage for our research design. So objectives are the goals to be achieved by conducting the research. We can have both general and specific objectives. The general objectives are usually the ones we talk about in the introduction, and then there's another section where we address the specific objectives. So our general objectives are what is to be accomplished by the research study. These are usually the broad, far-reaching aspects of the study. For example, should a specific blood test be used as a screening method? That's kind of a broad objective. Specific objectives are addressed later in the proposals, usually as specific research questions the investigator wants to answer. So, for example, what is the cost effectiveness of this blood test compared to other methods? From the objectives, our hypotheses or research questions can be developed. Deciding to use research questions or hypotheses depends on factors such as the purpose of the study, the nature of the design and or the methodology, and the audience of the research. So what is the difference between a research question and a hypothesis? A research question poses a relationship between two or more variables, but it phrases it as a question. Usually there's less information known. A hypothesis represents a declarative statement of the relationship between two or more variables. So for our hypotheses, they are a specific set of testable assumptions. We can have directional hypotheses. This is a possible explanation that the researcher makes about the expected relationship among variables. It is not a prediction, it's not an educated guess. So if you've ever heard those terms used before with respect to hypotheses, I want you to throw it out. I don't want you thinking about a hypothesis being a prediction or an educated guess, because it introduces bias. And we've talked about bias, and we don't want to introduce bias to our research. So instead, we're going to be giving an explanation for the expected relationship. Hypotheses tend to be, the directional hypotheses rather, they tend to be the more popular type of hypothesis. They tend to be based on prior literature and studies. And a well-formed hypothesis should guide the experiments. And we can set it up in the form of if, then, because. Directional hypotheses are set up for falsification. So if you remember back to Popper, when we talked about Popper, he felt that we should be trying to falsify, and having a directional hypothesis allows us to prove that falsification. Null hypotheses are used in statistical analysis, and they can be an acceptable hypothesis in a research proposal. They're a little bit more traditional, and the null hypotheses make a prediction that in the general population there is no relationship or no significant difference existing between groups of a variable. The wording is there is no difference or relationship between groups. So for some of you, you may be setting up a null hypothesis for your research. Others might have a directional hypothesis. And then some of you might not have either. You might not be able to develop a hypothesis, and that's okay. And that's where a research question or an engineering goal might be more appropriate. Again, research questions inquire about the relationship among variables that the investigator seeks to know, and it's essentially a hypothesis, but it's stated as a question. And you usually have you don't have as much background information. Engineering goals, you're defining a problem, and you want to determine what solution do you want to accomplish and the specifications that are going to be required.